You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Clain Udy, a passionate advocate, father, and author who is on a mission to rebrand autism and reshape how society perceives it. As the father of an adult son with high functioning autism, Clain's journey has taken him from wanting to fix his son to wholeheartedly embracing his son's unique strengths. With over 30 years of professional experience in human performance improvements and learning development, Clain combines his expertise and personal insights to empower individuals with autism to achieve fulfilling, sustainable careers. Welcome to the podcast, Clain Udy.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It's my honor to be here and be able to discuss this. Obviously, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and so anytime I get a chance to talk about it, I'm going to take you up on that.
Oh, that's awesome. And you brought it up. It's near and dear to your heart. So most of these, and most people who really give back to the field of autism are those that have a connection. So where did your passion start, and what inspired you to write the book Rebranding Autism? You must have had a drive coming from somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, I certainly did. I think it's very personal. Over my son, my adult son is 28 years old. He's an incredible young man named Christian. He's currently a senior in the mechanical engineering program at University of Colorado at Denver, and so I couldn't be more proud of him. Along our journey, I underwent a pretty profound transformation in my mindset and my thinking. So I started out, he was diagnosed in the year 2000, and something close to nothing was known about autism at the time, at least certainly by me. And I, over the in those early years, I very much had this, I call it deficit mindset. As much as all the love and that we had for him, it had nothing at all to do with that. But I was still seeing autism as this kind of external thing that was afflicting him. It was causing him to, display different behaviors, sometimes difficult behaviors, and causing him to not fit in, and therefore causing him to not be accepted. And that, as a parent, that's a very hard place to be, as I'm
Mhm.
sure all of our all the viewers can understand. And then when he was around 12 years old, a couple of things happened. Number one, um, I outright rejected um, the concept of normal, and I'll explain that with a story. We were we had accompanied him everywhere to all, any parties, any birthday parties. There weren't many, but any birthday parties he went to, any scouting events, I was always there under the guise of
Mhm.
volunteering. And mostly is to make sure that things went smoothly and to try to coach and nudge him toward normal the best I could, without really getting in the way and without hurting his self-esteem in the process.
Mhm.
Um, so there was this one scout trip. This was in the high mountain, Uinta Mountains in Utah, and I couldn't make it the first night, and so I hurried up the second night. I was very nervous. Every year on the news, some, young autistic kid had gone missing in the mountains. So I was, horrified at that prospect. So I went up as quickly as I could. I got there, and there I found our campsite, our troops campsite, and I went to, there were two kind of warm, glowing tents, and I could hear, voices. So I poked my head in. Hey, is Christian here? And no, he's not here. Wall to wall boys, right?
Mhm.
Laughing, telling jokes. And I went to the next one, he wasn't there either. So I was really, getting frantic, nervous. And they said, I think he's over there. So I looked over, kind of on the perimeter in this darker area, and there was our family tent, which slept 10 people. So
Hmm.
it's huge. Not that our family is that big, but it was a big tent. And so I went over and I was hoping A, that he would be there, and B, that maybe at least one other kid had the awareness to sleep, in the tent with him. But he was there all by himself. And so I,
Mm.
opened up the tent flap, and he doesn't get emotional very often, but I could tell he was really glad to see me. So I asked him, "Hey, did you spend the night by yourself last night?" And yeah, he had. And was it cold? Yeah, it was cold. So I wanted to fix the world. I wanted to go over and talk to the leaders, talk to the other scout and members, and say, you know, what happened here? I mean,
Yeah.
how could this have happened? And to the boys, you can be bigger than this. This is,
Hmm.
you can be better than this. But instead, I just wanted to be there with him. And then that night, I can distinctly remember just saying, I can't control what happens outside of our tent, outside of our home. I have little to no control over what happens out there, but I can control what happens here with us.
Hmm.
And so in that moment, I really kind of just rejected the the quest to be normal, to fit in, and and decided that whatever that meant, I was going to create a world in which my son could thrive.
Okay.
And so not long after that, I was rereading two books for a leadership development class that I was responsible for. It was First Break All the Rules by Don Clifton and Marcus Buckingham, and then Now Discover Your Strengths. A lot of people have heard of the Strengths Finder. It came from these books, and the books were a result of this huge Gallup survey. 130,000 people were interviewed to try to understand what makes managers good managers. And they
Hmm.
thought it might be, strategies, vision, all these things. It came down to the best managers are those managers who see, understand, and put people in a place where they can be in their strengths
Yeah.
most often. And so, it just hit me. It was like, this is more applicable to my son than anyone else in the world,
Hmm.
because we had always been looking at everything that wasn't right versus finding what his strengths were. In fact, his strengths were like almost completely hidden.
Yeah.
We didn't. So we determined from that moment on we were going to find and grow his strengths, and that really changed everything for him and for us. It rewired my entire thinking
Yeah.
around him, around autism, and so I just wanted to share that with people. So that's why I wrote the book.
Well, I appreciate that. And I mean, it took the clinical world a long time to catch up with that same thought process. Is that I started about in the 2000s, as well, early 2000s, right around when you were exploring autism the first time. And it was deficit oriented. It was, how am I going to make it so that this person can learn this skill that's failing, or this thing that's missing, and I'm never identifying a strength, just constantly looking at filling gaps.
Yep.
And I don't know that Christian is your son's name, correct?
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
that Christian would have been able to achieve everything he has as an engineer in college if all you did was focused on the negative things about the areas where he was wrong, or the areas where you the society felt he had to fix, but instead you empowered around his strengths so that he could be empowered to do what he wanted to do. Is that safe to say? Is that you found the areas that he wanted to really focus on, and you empowered him to do that?
100%. In fact, I'm sure, not to be too, pleased with ourselves, but I'm sure he would not be, where he is now. Um, I would say, so just backing up, what we had to do was we had to overtly look for clues,
Hmm.
and we had to, I considered what he always asked questions about, what he always talked about. And it was always about cars. It was always about, hey, Dad, which car is faster? Which one can brake the fastest? So it's all about cars and physics
Hmm.
and science, and automotive technology. So, and he also had a very high visual spatial IQ. And this was a clue that we'd been given in second grade, but we had just sort of, yeah, that's really cool to know. But then now let's focus on everything that's not that we need to
That's not
fix
a
here.
car. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. So yeah, so even in second grade, he would, we went to a parent teacher conference, or my wife did rather, and they showed a picture that he had drawn,
Hmm.
and was this, road that led to a vanishing point, and that had the telephone poles perfectly symmetrically, almost like a mathematical equation,
Hmm.
getting smaller and smaller in the distance. And his teacher said, no second grader does that. So that was like our first clue. And then he had an IQ test, and he tested above normal in most areas, and then in visual spatial abilities, like 99 percentile,
Hmm.
just super, super high. So we started to combine cars with visual spatial IQ, and so I started to introduce the idea that, hey, bud, people actually design cars for a living. So I introduced that kind of that career possibility into his mind.
Hmm.
And then we not soon after I got him Google SketchUp, and he started to model cars and camshafts and pistons, and just in his free time.
Yeah.
Um, and then we put him in a charter school, and he went through a certification program at a technical college while in high school on computer aided drafting.
Hmm.
And so just we started to, I think more than anything, help him see his strengths. It's important for us to see his strengths so we can kind of be out there in front of headlights and guide him in a good path. But, his self concept, his self identity just changed
Yeah.
dramatically.
But what
Um,
child doesn't? I mean, if you're really fostering a child's strengths, no matter who that child is that you're helping them to have opportunity to continue to build on those areas that they have passion, they have love, they have this desire, and then everything else falls into it. So a concern like, well, I'm concerned that my child isn't socializing. Well, let's build that into the strength. Let's figure out ways to be able to incorporate some of the interest in cars or the interest in the mechanics. Let's find groups that love that stuff and increase social opportunities that way and help to engage and kind of build some of those skills. But sometimes we forget that because we want normal, like you
well,
described,
normal.
and we want everything there. So how do we how do we rebrand from that? How did and you mentioned you were able to move from the thought of I'm going to go away from normal. How do we get away from thinking that if somebody is not behaving the way that is written in a book you're supposed to behave, that they're wrong and I need to fix something, instead of looking at that person as a bunch of talents or abilities that could add something to the environment around them?
I I'm a pretty independent person. And but that experience, especially with the pitching our own tent, that did something to me. And it was an outright rejection of normal. And so it really does take a certain level of defiance. I don't care, what other people think. I don't, all I care about is putting my child in a place where he or she can thrive, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, because I can't use the standard template. It
Hmm.
doesn't work. And so that's going to require me to think outside of the box and design a space, an environment that is going to work for my child. That's going to be different for my child, and that's what I think. It starts there because we can't. I see us like little tugboats trying to move this huge ocean liner, which is society, and
Hmm.
their expectations and their vision of who our children should be, how they should behave, um, and what they should expect from them. Um, what we can control is us. We can
Hmm.
control our own world in a micro way, and that's what matters most. If
Yep.
other people start to get on board with that, and that vision of strength starts to radiate outward into neighborhood friends, or schools, or the workplace, great. But it starts in the home, and it starts with the parent writing the kind of story uh, that their child is going to believe about themselves
Yeah.
every day. And then, another tactic that we use in the First Ascent program that I actually borrowed from a panelist, like 10 years ago, I went to an autism conference, and there was a young man who was engaged to be married on the spectrum. Both he and his fiance were on the spectrum. And so they agreed that they were going to create a personal user manual, a guide for
Hmm.
each other, so they can explicitly say, "This is who I am. This is how I behave. This is how to troubleshoot me." you know. So literally,
Yep.
they were on the same page together, and so they were making very explicit everything that was unspoken and implicit. And I thought that's brilliant. So when I started to build the First Ascent program after that, I incorporated this idea of a personal user guide that can start, with parents helping develop that guide for their kiddos, so they know
Hmm.
what their strengths are, they know what kind of environment they're going to do well in, and they can start. This is a living document that they can develop, and then over time the young adult, the adolescent young adult can start to own that, and they can start to
Yeah.
take over that, and they can educate teachers, they can
Hmm.
educate friends or colleague, they can educate bosses in the workplace, not in any sort of heavy-handed way, but simply to say, this is the kind of environment that do really well in. I want to
Yep.
bring, be my best self at school and at work, and here's what that looks like for me. So
That ability to self-advocate is so important. I mean, and a lot of times when we talk about these things, it's okay, well, for the autistic individual, this works. But it goes beyond that. I mean, everybody I can think of when you're talking about establishing a strong relationship, knowing who you are, communicating to somebody, this is how I communicate best, or this is how you can tell when I'm feeling upset or angry. So this is, that reciprocation of knowing who you are and being able to advocate is so important. But when we're talking about, the society at large, and you had mentioned this, it's got to be hard for a I mean, even for your son, is that having some of the negative connotations that people just throw out there, generally speaking, of, well, you're autistic, so you can't do this, or you can't do that, or you're not going to do this. That's got to be hard to battle through while you're trying to build the resiliency to be able to say, no, but this is who I am. This is what I am capable of doing. And this is who I am in a positive light, because that's the way I should be seen, are all my strengths, the way that I am able to enjoy the world around me and contribute to it.
Yeah, I think a couple things happened when I started to really focus on discovering and growing his strengths. Number one is it gave me the mind space to look past a lot of the things that are different
Hmm.
because I was looking for the strength. And
Yep.
so, the things that had sort of, I guess, worried me, the talking to yourself or stimming or, having a meltdown. I mean, those are things that continued to happen, but they seemed much less important and
Yep.
prominent in my thinking. I just kind of put them to the back of my mind. And that also gave me the space, the mind space to be able to say, why is this happening? Why is he talking
Hmm.
to himself? I originally I was worried, well, is he actually thinking, is he hallucinating? Is he bipolar? What? Um, but it wasn't that at all. He was just regulating himself by, talking through mostly film scripts, you
Yeah.
know, dialogue.
Hmm.
Um, and once I started to ask why, it was like, there's a perfectly logical explanation for this that and I even started to kind of appreciate some of those regulate self-regulating behaviors. And I think the other thing that was, if you talk about kind of the more difficult behaviors, like a meltdown,
Hmm.
if you could start to kind of understand, again, ask the why and understand what is causing that you know that response, then you can go a long way to finding the conditions where he's not in that space, he's not in that environment, and you can keep him in a space where of his strengths, and so that
Hmm.
greatly mitigates those things happening. And then finally, I think, you know by him focusing on his own strengths, a lot of the frustration and the angst that come with maybe not seeing yourself in that way,
Hmm.
just went away.
Yep.
So a lot of the behaviors that had concerned me in elementary school were just mostly gone.
Hmm. And that positive self-perception has to have some form of real effect on the reduction of mental health issues that oftentimes you see with autistic adults, is that because of the way that they've worked through, or society has kind of held them in specific regard, is that
Yep,
it's built up a negative self concept, and that leads to depression at times. That leads to anxiety. Am I comfortable going into this space because I don't think people are going to accept me? But as
I
soon as you
can't
get that
trust people.
confidence,
Yeah,
it's awesome. Yeah. So you worked really hard on establishing 15 signature autistic abilities,
yeah,
if I'm correct. Can we touch on just a few of those? Just because I think it's important for us to know, as we're talking about strengths, abilities go hand in hand. So it's nice to talk about these 15 abilities that might be out there.
yeah. And even in so much that you've seen the spider diagram or the radar diagram where you say, to what degree do they have these? Sometimes they're deficits, right?
Hmm.
To what degree do they have? I flipped that on his head in the book, and I said, okay, here we got 15 signature strengths that are pretty common in folks on the spectrum, and then let's try to find out to what degree people have those strengths. So
Hmm.
but I would say, like, right now we have in our first ascent program a young woman, young adult, and she is, she first came in there, we always get to know them and ask what their interests were. Pokemon, so like, you see this a lot, Pokemon. And so then you ask yourself, okay, so what is appealing, or what is it that you like about about Pokemon? And it really comes down to, she thrives in being able to sort and categorize and collect things.
Hmm.
So she has a high level of pattern recognition and categorization. And
Okay.
so we went through the entire program and, progressively we start to dial in a career vision. And at the end of it, she's now tracking toward a career as a librarian
Hmm.
because that's what they thrive in. Now, for me, that would be I could never, they'd kick me out in a day if I were expected to do that. But she
Hmm.
absolutely thrives in it, does it all on her own. So I would say in pattern recognition, any data analyst, any computer programmer, a lot of video game is about pattern recognition. So those strengths, you just have to kind of explore them and poke them a bit until you understand what is driving some of the passions and the interests, and then we can get to different options. The other I'll put in there, I'll put in my son as well. Again, high visual spatial acumen ability. When he went through this computer aided drafting program, um, his instructor, so he's there with all these adults, like full on
Hmm.
adults, and he's like 14, and sitting alongside him. And I went in after class one day. I was just talking to his teacher, and his teacher said, "Your son, I mean, he just gets it. I think he went through that whole 1,200-hour curriculum in about half the time that it took, you know." So it just comes, there's just this in his mind, there's just super highway of
Hmm.
visual spatial ability, um, that is that's incredible. So, and then the third one I'll put out there, which is very common, is a deep fascination, a deep expertise in something. And I'll use Nolan Ferris as my example, who I feature in the book as a portrait of strength. But Nolan was born basically the size of a a package of butter. Um, so very, very premature. Spent the first year of his life, in NICU, 22 surgeries,
Mm.
had cerebral palsy as well. So, but even when he was in the NICU, his parents put a little piano with these big oversized piano keys, and he would kick those keys with his feet. And then when they got him home, first of all, they said he wouldn't live, did. Then they said he won't walk. So they bought him a little organ, and they would just keep that out of his reach. He had a tracheotomy, so he had to, lay on his back. So he just sort of did this. They would move it away from him, and he did this reverse crawl thing to
Hmm.
get to the keyboard so he could play it. And then so he was able to crawl, then he was able to stand, and now if you look at him, he's 24 years old. And from the moment he is awake to the moment he goes to sleep, 7 days a week, he is doing music. He'll have like two, three, up to eight different devices, from iPads to YouTube to radio stations, and he's composing. He doesn't speak, but he's
Hmm.
composing music in a very kind of postmodern way.
Oh, that's so
Um,
cool.
is very cool. So I think that, again, that's an example of someone who is, call it, a lot of people would say very, very challenged. I would say he's what I talk to his parents, and they'll say he's one of the most satisfied people they know
Yeah.
because he's
I
living
mean,
in his strength.
yeah, and he's enjoying every second of his day that he's able to engage in that passion that he has, which I think we all thrive. We all thrive when we're able to experience what it is that we are seeking, that passion, that drive. When you were talking about the career components to this, I find that very important because oftentimes, even as we're starting to see in high school, we have a variety of children that have these extremely gifted strengths in certain areas, but we're so focused on, let's fix the problems. And then you're not giving the time, the energy to the strength, and the child isn't getting to explore that on their own. So their happiness starts to kind of dwindle a little bit. But when we do that, that sets off a career path. That sets off the ability to kind of harness that for future and to be able to kind of create a life around it. Is there something to those five abilities? And then that I think that you had also mentioned that there are 15 abilities, sorry, but five cognitive profiles that we could learn from to be able to kind of help to harness and understand, hey, you know what? This is what I'm seeing. This is what this child's telling me. This is what this young adult is showing me. Let's give them some guidance to be able to achieve what they're hoping to be able to get to.
Yeah, so yes, the cognitive profiles that I referenced in the book, they come from Simon Baron Cohen's book, The Pattern Seekers. And in the patterns, he's a renowned psychiatrist from Cambridge. And this is an amazing book. I would recommend it to anyone. But he basically says there's five cognitive patterns. You've got two basic patterns. You've got on the one side, you've got the people who are systemizers. He calls it the systemizing mechanism. And then you've got the empathizers. So on the empathizers, you have people who are very good at intuiting, are very good at reading people, knowing what to say, when to say it. Also very good at deception. Yeah, ironically, because you have to understand people to
Mhm.
be deceitful, something that yeah, our young kids on the spectrum usually are not good at, which is fantastic. And then you've got on the other side, you've got the pattern seekers, and these are people who see patterns, and they're able to create basically the scientific method. They're able to say, if I do this, then this is likely to
Mhm.
happen. And they test that over and over and over again and to see if they're going to get a different result. So within those two broad cognitive types, he breaks the general population up into five. You've got the people who are kind of balanced, who are not better at empathy or systems, right?
Mhm.
Systematic thinking. Then you've got the empathizers and that's the balanced people are about a third of the population. The empathizers who are the people who are better at empathizing that's another third of the population. And then you've got a very rare kind of profile here, maybe just a few percentage points, who are the empaths of the world.
Okay.
And then on the other side, on the systematic side of the equation, you've got about a third, and these can be engineers, a lot of STEM people in there, a lot of business people, even athletes. He points to Kobe Bryant as a pattern seeker, you know,
Mhm.
and then you've got the extreme systemizers out here, and those are kind of those rare geniuses out there
Mhm.
who are anyway his studies and his research have led him to conclude that roughly most people on the spectrum fall in this systemizing camp, roughly double the number of in the general population. So when you see people who are maybe not great communicators, not great, interacting with people, that's fine because their strength is here.
Yeah.
They are. And by the way, he will say that most of the innovation throughout human history have come from this group.
Mhm.
These who hyper systemizers, he calls them. And so, it's an incredible heritage. Um, and it's an incredible cognitive profile. And there are a lot of I've taken many young adults through the First Ascent program, and we do a lot of assessment around their strengths. And not all of them, but a lot of them, a very high percentage fall in that cognitive mindset, which makes them particularly good in certain fields that deal with STEM related fields, manufacturing, with um, music and art too, as well.
Hmm.
But I would say, yeah, very high prevalence of that cognitive profile in the on the spectrum.
Which obviously you don't want to miss out on, either if you have the strength or if you're a future employer or something like that. You want to be able to kind of allow somebody to thrive with that strength. So, what is the role of educators to create an environment where somebody could thrive, knowing who they are and kind of how they process and where their strengths are? And then also, what about the workforce? What do we need to be able to do in the workforce to make sure that somebody's in the right seat on the bus, has the right position, can really contribute in the way that they want and be successful?
Yeah, I would say in education, and I have a chapter on that, and I drew from other authors extensively in that chapter, but it really is coordinating and communicating with the parents to understand the strengths of the child. They might be too young to really know,
Hmm.
especially like in elementary school. They might not know what their strengths are. You might not be able to see them, you know.
Yep.
So it's really incumbent on to speak with the parents and honestly, the parents probably haven't thought a whole lot about it either. You
Hmm.
know, but to be able to open that dialogue up, and if they are fixated with roller coasters or electronics or whatever their fascination is, go with it,
Hmm.
and give them opportunities to not only do that and thrive in that interest, but also be able to demonstrate that expertise to class members, because that's part of rebranding, how they see this young child. um, Give them alternate ways of rather than lecture, rather than test, give them projects to work on, give them, meet them where they are in their strengths. It's very similar in a work environment. So for I would say this, in a work environment, the one of the biggest obstacles that we face when young adults come into the First Ascent program is self-belief.
Hmm.
Um, their parents, bless their hearts, they're just trying to protect them. They know what it is to work in a professional environment, and they don't want their child to fail in that environment. So they kind of hold back on that career expectation, and they're very indecisive about whether their child can even have a career, can even have a job, but because they're, rightfully so, they're afraid.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the first things that we have to do is to start to create a career vision. That's the foundation. Until you have until you understand your strengths and what you can contribute to your own life and to the workplace, you're that's foundational. And then
Hmm.
I see it as more like, one of those dialogues. You start with their interests and what motivates them. You line those two things. Then you start to look at their work preferences. We use the RACIC code to align. Every job has its DNA. Every person has its DNA. Those have to be very well aligned. And then you start to look at the environmental factors, like, so they'll say, I'll give you an example. They say autistic people are not really good at social communication. What we do is we break that up into different levels. So at a level one, you have like a salesperson, an
Hmm.
entrepreneur. They have to know what to say, when to say it. They have to read people, very fluid, open-ended communication. And then the next layer is a little more structured. Think of the next level, think of a barista. You know,
Hmm.
what they say is very self-contained. They're not gonna, they're not going to say anything that is outside of the script, if you
Yep.
will. They do very well in that. And then think of a small group of coders, programmers. Most of it is about the work, very infrequent interaction. Most of it is about very, very little small talk. And then if you get down here, you're looking at, you know, think of a mechanical engineering technician, and most of their day is about the work itself, head
Hmm.
down, focused on the work itself. The engineer might come in, at the beginning of the day, check in, make sure everything's going well. It might have a question. If they do talk, it's about the thing itself. It's about work. So if you say, my son, for instance, can do this all day long. He's very, very good. He'll have a project going on. I'll say, hey, bud, what you working on? And he'll explain the aerodynamics of an airplane wing to me. And he'll do it very, very um, understandably. But so again, it's about finding that space in which they will thrive, not just their strengths, but all of the work environment factors, the level of structure, the level of stimulation, the type of communication. Those are
Hmm.
all considerations that a lot of people don't have to pay attention to. People on
Yeah.
the spectrum do.
And it makes a big difference in that work environment is feeling that I'm not having additional stressors that I really don't want as part of that. I don't want to have to sit there and have chit chat all day. I'd like to work directly on my project for some people. It's knowing that these stressors will take me away from the things that I love doing that are part of my passion. So I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I almost look at it as, we have the community responsibility, and then you have the goals of the individual and the caregiver. And I hear everything is about figuring out the strengths, exploration, understanding who one is, and then being able to take that and to understand the perspective, but also self-advocate and be able to put that out there so that you can let people know who you are, what it is that helps you to be as successful as possible, and that I don't necessarily need to change when I go into new environments. I just need to make sure everybody else understands this is how I do best, and can we work around some of these things, and then making sure that the opportunity and the empowerment align. So really evaluating what is my best situation. Is that kind of is that a good takeaway from from kind of the concepts that you're putting out there?
100%. I think that, if you look at rebranding autism and changing the way people think about autism, it starts in the home. And it starts with parents, creating a vision of their child, autistic child, that the child can believe in. And then from there, it's empowering parents, it's empowering the autistic person to be able to start radiating that out and educating and communicating with teachers, with friends, with parents of school, on a play date, and then
Hmm.
eventually to the workplace. So I very much see, rather than this kind of overarching public awareness, macro level rebranding effort, I don't think those work very well, honestly. I think it starts here. And as long as if you can change the narrative and change the way you see autism in the home, that's, you're there. Everything
Hmm.
else is gravy, right?
Yeah.
And then you can start to radiate that understanding upwards and outwards to other people too, so that you can say, this is who I am. Would love for you to be part of my journey,
Hmm.
but I'm on my own journey.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to be able to share your lived experience. And the only way that other people can understand what your lived experience is that you have done the exploration, know what it is, and know what's important to you to be able to talk through it, or for others to advocate with you to be able to express that. Where can folks go to access your program, your books? You've put a lot of time and energy into this,
Yeah.
and sharing that is, I think, very important.
Yeah, well, I would love to get the book in as many hands as possible. And so I would start there. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, it's in paperback, it's in ebook, it's in audiobook. But please, read the book, refer the book to other people. I really, the people who have read it already, it's only been out for a month. um, they have all said this is transformative. This changed the way I think about autism. So that's exactly what I want to happen. Beyond that, you can visit autismelevated.com, and that's where I have, some resources about what we're about, and also has if you have a young adult who is kind of looking to a career potentially, would invite you to check out the First Ascent program. It's on autismelevated.com. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Well, Clain, I appreciate your time and expertise today, and I think that just even listening to this is that if you can start people down the path of just thinking slightly different and starting to change some of the way they're approaching situations and approaching understanding of themselves and the world around them, I think that it makes everything better for everyone. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.